I came about a year and a bit ago for World Youth Day, so I was here for 5 weeks then, and I was very blessed. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. I found that the people were very friendly and very caring, and just had a very blessed time. When I did one of the talks, it's probably the biggest talk I ever gave. I think I was speaking to about 170 odd thousand. The first talk, which was at Darling Harbour. And as I was walking up, I said to Jesus, "Is this what you created me for?" And I felt him say to me, "The only thing I created you for was for me to love you." I wrote my book, From Gangland to Promised Land, which has become a bestseller. And I think when you write a book, you have to get very deep, you know. And so when I was the person I used to be, it's almost like you have to get back into that person. Obviously, when I wanted to leave, I went to a guy who was a bit like a father to me. His name's Bulldog in the book, and he was like a massive East End villain. And I said to him, "Look, I found God and I want out." St. John Bosco said, the more a kid screams at us, the more he's saying, "Please love me." And I think for me that I've worked with a lot of very broken kids. Like one boy I worked with, Stuart, he had suffered every bit of abuse it was possible to suffer. And I remember saying to him on one occasion, he had a big conversion and sort of found Christ. And I remember saying to him on one occasion, the Holy Spirit really is telling me that you've been badly sexually abused. And he just said to me, "No one knows that." Do you know what I mean? No one, how can you know that? And I just said, "He's saying I pick up Stuart." He was 16, he was with us in, you know, community, and I just said, I can really see that, you know. And I really felt that God was asking me to pray over Stuart and to ask, the same as Lily, to ask for Christ to come into those areas where he had been abused. And through that, you see the transformation in this kid. So for the last 17 years, I've had spiritual direction, and everyone in community has got their own spiritual director. And I think it's absolutely crucial for us people who are trying to minister to God to have spiritual direction from someone like a priest, or someone who is responsible and someone very close to God and has lived that sort of walk with God, so that they can share that walk with us. So I really emphasise that we should all have spiritual direction of some form. Sometimes prayer to me is like torture. Sometimes I feel like I'm being wrapped up in barbed wire in prayer. But I'll give you an example. I was in Cincinnati and I wanted to go to the IHOP, which is the International Pancake House. As you can see, I like pancakes. And I just felt, well, you know, I should really do a bit of prayer. So I went into this chapel. I was staying with some Dominicans, and I went into their chapel and I was doing the office, and he was like pulling teeth. And I just thought, what am I doing here? And I just turned to Jesus and I said, what on earth am I doing here? I said, I could be in the IHOP eating pancakes, but I give up my time to come to you, and all I do is get tortured, so why am I here? And I felt him say, what about yesterday? And yesterday I had been lustful, I had been selfish, I had been spiteful to one of the people I was with. And it was like him saying, you need to go through your examination of conscience. It's not me who's putting up the barriers. I'm loving you exactly the same every day. It's you who's putting up the barriers through your sin. And as I went through this examination of conscience the day before, and I apologised to God for being so lustful, for being so selfish, for being so prideful, for being so spiteful, the barriers came down and the grace came pouring in. And I felt loved. But God hadn't stopped loving me. I had stopped loving God. And the barriers were up because of me. And I think a lot of times when we are in barbed wire, It's because God is saying something to us and we don't want to listen. And so we can sit there all holy, but really we're not in the presence of God because we're not surrendering to God. So, and whenever I go into prayer, normally if it's agitating or if it's hard, it's because I need to sit there and work out why it's agitating and why it's hard. Because there's something in my life I'm not surrendering. There's some aspect of my life that I'm not addressing. That's normally why there's a discomfort. I'm not at peace. And so because I'm not at peace, God's love isn't able to penetrate my heart. Another aspect to that is, on the other side, is I don't go in the church expecting to feel God's love. You know, I've got a friend who's been in clothes for 67 years. Her name's Mother Gabriel. She's a poor Claire. She's like my mobile spiritual director, because every time I ring, I know she's always in, because she's never out. And so when I ring her up, you know, I always get her. But one time I was visiting her, and she said, John, she said, here are feelings. Feelings take us anywhere. You know what I mean? But here is faith. Faith only ever takes us to God. She said, get past the feelings and to the faith. So I don't have to feel God. You know, I think when we first find God, he gives us lots of sweeties and it's lovely. But then he says, do you love me enough without the sweeties? And I think that's where a lot of people fall away. But to me, I find that I don't need to feel God every day. I don't, you know, I can go months without feeling God, but when I most need it, he always seems to give it to me. And sometimes when I don't need it, but he's so generous that he gives me that explosion of his grace in my heart. And so I think that as much as when we might feel that prayer is hard and we might need to face something, sometimes prayer can be dry. And that's because we're not working on feelings, we're working on faith. I know I have to pray every day. And when we're open with our brokenness, Christ is in, his light comes pouring in. And then we change, and then we become the people who Christ is calling us to be. My mobile spiritual director, Mother Gabriel, I remember ringing her up on one occasion and I said to her that, you know what, Mother, I said, the more I get close to Christ, the more I see my utter contemptibleness and my utter unworthiness. And she said, yes. And I said, isn't it great? And she said, you've got it, you've got it. And when we see, you know, I think St. Francis said, when someone said, St. Francis, well, Francis, you're disgusting, you're horrible, you're so selfish, you're so broken. And he said, you don't know the half. I'm twice as bad as what you describe. And it's almost like when we see our nothingness, we see that there's nothing that God can't do with us. And I just really believe that as we get to know that we don't have to be perfect, we don't have to be so wonderful on the outside, we just have to invite God into every part of our hearts. That's the freedom that he created us for. And the other thing is that God never ever calls the qualified. He always qualifies the chosen. So people, you know, who might be listening to this tape might think, what have I got to offer? And it's not what you've got to offer. It's the authority that's in your heart that you've got to offer, which is Christ. And there's nothing he can't do if we're willing to give him permission. So that's what I wanted to share.